Hello, this is Dr. Young, and I'm going to go over Chapter 3, which is Individual Characteristics. So our learning objectives for this chapter are explain the nature of individual differences, the concept of fit, and the role of realistic job previews, define personality and describe general personality frameworks and attributes that affect behavior in organizations, identify and discuss other important personality traits that affect behavior in organizations. Discuss different kinds of intelligence that affect behavior in organizations. Describe different learning styles that influence how people process information and that affect behavior in organizations. And that's it. So those are our objectives for this chapter. So what we want to talk about is just, people and organizations. So we have individual differences and we have a person-job fit. So individual differences just means that there are personal attributes that make us different from one another. It's very simple, and those all affect how teams and employees work together and influence organizational culture and organizations. So a lot of times when an organization hires, it's probably the most common method is the person-job fit. So you are hiring for a job and you're looking for the right person to fit that job. You might be looking for certain characteristics, skills, competencies that relate to the specific job that you're hiring for. Now, there are other types of fit, not just person-job. There's person-group, which is, how well an individual will fit with a work group, supervisor's work style, skills, and goals. And this is something that is probably more and more common because there's so much more teamwork in organizations. A lot of organizations are moving towards a flatter structures and more teamwork. There's person-organization, the fit between an individual's values, beliefs, and personality and the values, norms, and culture of the organization. So that's much broader in scope. That's more less skill related. Not that they would hire someone that doesn't have the skill, or the certain knowledge requirements for the job, but they are also looking beyond that. To see if they're a fit for the organization and not just the job. And then there's person vocation, which is the fit between a person's interest, abilities, values, and personality and a profession. So that's more based on the profession and not the organization. So I guess a good example, I'm going to go back up to the person organization, which kind of reminds me of when I was a flight attendant. Delta and other airlines are pretty, they're pretty formal and I guess maybe conservative, traditional, I guess is the word to use. But then there's Southwest Airlines, which is completely different. And I worked for Delta, and I used to be jealous of some of the other flight attendants because their culture was completely different. Their organization was completely different. Whereas mine was, valued structure, formality, politeness, just very professionalism. Southwest was, you had to be outgoing. You had to be entertaining. You had to be enthusiastic and very positive and be able to express that. And there's no way I probably wouldn't be able to work there. I mean, I am to an extent, but you really had to be outgoing and, put yourself out there. So, very different cultures. Very complete opposite. I guess a shyer person. I'm not really shy, but I'm just not flamboyantly just enthusiastic. And that's what they wanted. That's what they wanted you to be. So if you were that way, you could get a job and be a great fit at that organization. Realistic job previews. What they do is present both positive and potentially negative information to the job candidate. So the goal is not to, push people away, but it's very, it's a good method because it reduces turnover. You don't want to misrepresent a job, so you give them the pros and the cons of the job, and it's you build trust right off the bat for interested parties that are interested in the job, and there's no surprises. So later on, they're not going to say, well, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, or they didn't tell me that I would have to do this, or so it's a very smart strategy to use. Okay, and so now we're going to get into the personality traits. We're talking about the individual in the organization. So we're going to get down to personality, which is basically the relatively stable set of psychological attributes that distinguish one person from another. And so the big five is a set of fundamental traits that are especially relevant to organizations. So there's agreeableness, conscientiousness, excuse me, I can't say it, conscientiousness, neuroticism, extroversion, and openness. I'm going to say conscientiousness 10 times really fast. Anybody with me? Okay. If I can get it out once, I'm good. So those are the big five personality traits. Now, these are different, on the psychological continuum here. I took personality and we went over all these theories. But there's also the Myers-Briggs, and you probably heard of that one. That's a very popular test as far as what its predictive nature, that's iffy. There's arguments for and against that, but it is used. And the continuum is extroversion, introversion. There's that continuum. There's sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, judging, perceiving. So everyone falls somewhere on that continuum for each one of these categories. Okay, so there's 16 personality classifications result from higher and lower positions on the general dimensions, which I just said pretty much. It's used for so many different things. I took it for a sales job, which I can completely understand why that would be applicable easily, and I scored in the middle with extroversion, introversion, which I could argue is situational, so maybe that explains that result. But anyway, it's very interesting, and I think it probably is valuable for such jobs that require a lot of putting yourself out there, not being afraid to be, basically very vocal and, putting yourself out there requires a great deal of extroversion in sales, obviously. So I think that's probably more important. That continuum is more important, but, for other jobs, there might be judging, perceiving might be a critical dimension, or thinking, feeling might be, more important for certain jobs. So, anyway. And then intelligence, obviously general mental ability, the capacity to rapidly and fluidly acquire, process, and apply information. Information processing capacity. So that's the manner in which individuals process and organize information, and it affects learning, performance, organization, and just the ability to process information that comes in. And these are important as well for the individual, and their differences, because there are differences in people in all of these. And some people need different things. For example, task learning, I might be able to teach someone a task by giving them a lecture here, or I might need to show them how to do the task step by step. Video might work for someone else. Somebody might need to just, there's some people that you can show them, but they just need to do it themselves. Like you could show them, but they have to physically do it themselves. And you're just watching them won't be enough. Watching someone do it won't be enough. They have to work it out, maybe make mistakes, maybe work through the mistakes, and then, oh, okay, so you know what I'm saying. So all of these, there are different levels of intelligence among people in organizations. There's emotional intelligence, which is a big one. There's been various studies I've read lately about this that, future jobs are going to require a greater amount of emotional intelligence. And I guess, to me, I can see how that would be possible, because as we move into automation and jobs that are going to be taken over by computers or robots or whatever, there might be more service-oriented jobs, and if that's the case, EQ is very important. If you're dealing with other human beings, it's very important. But it's still, it's important now for leading, for working in teams. So, and especially in this current environment where emotion is kind of taken over reason in some areas. So, ability to control and manage emotions in yourself and other people is very important. So the dimensions of EQ are self-awareness, self-motivation, self-management, empathy, and social skills. So all of these are very important. Being aware of what you're feeling, being able to motivate yourself through obstacles, setbacks, and problems, being able to manage your emotions and not let them get the best of you or out of control, being able to see how others are feeling and empathize, being able to feel that is important. Recognizing others' feelings, and then handling the emotions of others. So being able to handle, someone else's outburst, someone else's breakdown, someone else's, problems, emotions, and not letting that get to you. Okay. So we're going back to we're going to a theory, Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, which in this case is kind of breaking down all the types of intelligences. So there's linguistic, which is pretty self-explanatory. There's mathematical, logical, pretty self-explanatory. Musical, bodily, spatial, interpersonal, and interpersonal and intrapersonal. So some of these we've already talked about. This is just another theory that incorporates those and more in a different way. And then there's learning styles, sensory modalities. So those are categorized into 4 areas, which is visual, learning by seeing, auditory, learning by hearing, learning by touching, and learning by doing. So these are some of the things I had mentioned before. Some people are better learners when they are given a visual, pictures, animation. The graphical representation works for them. Some are more receptive to sound, hearing. Maybe recorded, like, some people I know, they listen, podcast, audible.com, they don't read books, they listen to books. That's the way they take in the information, the best way. Tactile, learning by touching. And that's something that's, it's not always easy to, it doesn't really fit everything, but there's some people that are better at learning by touching. obviously people that are visually challenged would be more tactile, um, in that sense. And then kinesthetic, which is learning by doing, which is my favorite way to learn. I need to do it. I need to get up and do it before I really know it. And, that's just one of those, that's just another way of learning. And it's also, tactile and kinesthetic learning is similar in nature, and sometimes they're, kind of referred interchangeably, because when I go up and I do something with my hand, like if I'm going to learn how to, okay, let me just think of an example. If I'm going to learn how to play an instrument, for example, I'm touching the instrument. I'm touching it, I'm doing it, but I'm also, there's two things going on there. There's both of those modalities going on at the same time. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Cobb's Learning Style Inventory. And we have a different set of learners here, and you can see here there are some major components here, but they're all in different types of order pretty much. You've got active experimentation, you have abstract conceptualization, you have reflective observation. And so basically those are the three. And there's different combinations of these. And you kind of fall into the groups. And there's a inventory. It takes 30 to 45 minutes to complete. And then you develop profiles. And these are the profiles that you see here. Okay. So you have convergers, divergers, assimilators, and accommodators. And you can see the combination of each one. So basically, when you're talking about concrete experience, that focuses on being involved in experiences and dealing with immediate human situations in a personal way. So it emphasizes feeling more than thinking, and it involves it's more intuitive over systematic, scientific type approaches. Okay, so that's one of the elements of this. Then there's reflective observation, which you see on here as well, and that focuses on understanding the meaning of ideas and situations by observing and describing them. So it emphasizes reflection and understanding over practicality and action. All right, and so there's that, and there's abstract conceptualization, which is basically, it focuses on using logic, ideas, and concepts, and it emphasizes thinking over feeling. So it's the opposite of concrete experience. It's more scientific, less artistic. And actually, I did forget one of these, I'm sorry. And then there's active experimentation, and that focuses on influencing people and changing situations. So it emphasizes practical applications and pragmatic concern with what works than what is true. And overall, an emphasis on doing more than observing. So you can see that when you take this inventory, you get categorized into one of these groups. And what is this, what good does this do? Well, if you are categorized as a certain group, then, you might as far as your learning or even doing your job, you might have better tools to do your job, or even learn, during training and development activities at at the organization. If you know where you fall into in these different modes, then you can, the training can be catered to you better. If you're more of a feeling, artistic type of person versus a scientific person, then you might need a different way of training might need to be communicated to you differently. Or if you are training an audience that is more, for example, a diverger, then you might need to tweak your training to that audience. You might have had a more, if you have a presentation that really uses a lot of abstract, teaching materials, that's not going to work for a diverger, for example. That's not going to, you're going to need a different type of approach, because that person's not going to be receptive. And again, like I said, this is from the perspective of the trainer, and also from the perspective of a learner, or even just doing your job. Someone is going to need to update you on training, or if you are the learner, you need to know who you are, what kind of learner you are, and what you're most receptive to. So that's why these are important, because you cannot, and overall, if you look at all these intelligences, learning styles, everything that we've talked about, they're all about, there's no cookie cutter approach to employees. You can't just say, well, this is how we're going to do it, and everyone's going to have to just, because then you're going to lose people, and you don't want to, you want to make sure that everyone knows what they're supposed to do, and when they're, they're getting trained, they are getting the information they need, and they're retaining that information. If you're the trainer, you want to make sure that you're able to communicate to the audience what you want to say, and that they will retain that information. Because if you don't understand learning styles, or you don't have any consideration of that, you're going to lose, your audience. Or you're not going, or if you're the one being, trained, you're not going to understand, and you're not going to be able to use what you learn in your job to maximize your own performance. So you can see how this is all connected. So that's all for this week's lecture. Here goes the text. If you have any questions or concerns, let me know, and I'll be happy to assist you. Thank you for listening, and let's have a great week.